How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and right now, of course, we're taking a close look at Tropical Storm Beryl, which has just come off the African coast. It currently has sustained winds at around 65 miles per hour, and based on the water vapor imagery, you could easily tell that it's not very organized and definitely nowhere near as organized as it was even only 48 hours ago when we were talking about borderline a Category 3 hurricane making landfall right up along the Yucatan Peninsula. As we clearly see, there isn't a lot of convective activity, which makes sense. The center of circulation was over land for a prolonged period of time, so it was disconnected from the fuel, which is warmer water temperatures of the Caribbean. That would help enhance that convective activity and really help raise the humidity levels as well as the lift right around the center of circulation for more convective activity to occur. It was disconnected from that, so of course we don't see really much rain shower activity associated with this storm system. However, as you might already know, that's about to change in the future because of course now the center of circulation is over land and we're going to see conditions that are just favorable enough for this to gradually intensify. I wouldn't say it'll rapidly intensify like we saw only a few days ago right around the Caribbean, as there will be some factors that will potentially hinder this from potentially developing very rapidly, but it is expected for the most part the conditions will be favorable enough for this to continue to intensify before it potentially makes landfall right up along the Texas coast. Other features I want to point out in the water vapor imagery include this upper level low, which is located just off the Mexican as well as Texas coast, where we do see that the winds are spiraling around this direction, as this upper level low should help limit the intensification of this storm system just enough to a point where it won't rapidly intensify, but the wind shear associated with this upper level low won't necessarily be strong enough to completely disintegrate this storm or to completely prevent it from intensifying either. It should certainly help, but it won't really be enough to really stop this storm from intensifying, most likely, because this upper level low isn't very strong and it's only expected to weaken as it continues ahead further northwestward. Let me show you guys that right now. The Euro model clearly shows where this upper level low is located, pretty much right in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, and that has been weakening this storm system over the past several days. We did see that just to the north of Jamaica and right over Cuba, there was a stronger amount of wind shear, and since the storm system in the lower levels was going towards the west while the winds were moving towards the east, that creates a strong amount of wind shear over this storm system, and enough to where it certainly weakened from where it was at a Category 5 status just a few days ago, which is certainly good news. But and we will continue to see that wind shear stick around for the next couple of days as well, right over the Gulf of Mexico. However, the key difference is that the upper level winds will come from a southerly direction rather than from a westerly direction, and what that means is that will weaken the wind shear because this storm system in the lower levels is expected to move more towards the northwesterly direction. And while that's not necessarily the exact same direction as where these upper level winds are moving towards, because the upper level winds are moving straight from the south while this storm system is moving from a southwesterly direction, it's still enough of a the direction is still at least close enough between the upper level winds and the lower level winds to weaken the wind shear for this to intensify despite the stronger upper level winds we're seeing over the Gulf of Mexico. And unfortunately, the wind shear will only continue to weaken as this continues ahead further northwestward, because eventually we're going to see this storm system move from a northwesterly direction to just a straight northerly direction, which would be the same direction as where these upper level winds would be moving towards, and that weakens the wind shear. If you don't know what wind shear is, it's pretty much a change in wind direction or speed with height. So if the wind shear is a bit too strong, let's say the direction between the upper level winds and lower level winds are a bit too strong, that creates an unfavorable environment because we have energy at different levels of the atmosphere going at different directions. But when the wind direction at all levels of the atmosphere are going the same direction, that maximizes where the energy goes, as the vorticity pretty much is moving all towards the same direction. It's all there's a lot more convergence in a scenario like that, and we see a much stronger storm, and that's what's expected to happen by the time it's pretty much right at the Texas coast doorstep right around Sunday, where this storm system, thanks to a weakness in ridging and thanks to a lower level trough that's expected to move southward into the Midwest, it's going to move towards a due northerly direction, which will move the same direction as which the upper level winds are moving towards. And the upper level low that I was talking about over the Gulf of Mexico is expected to weaken, which should help limit the wind shear. So it's most likely going to strengthen quite a bit by the time this approaches the Gulf of Mexico. How much you're probably asking, that still has yet to be seen. The next couple of days will be critical depending on how strong this upper level low will be. But the most likely scenario is that we will see a hurricane landfall right up along Texas. As right now, it seems like the current consensus is right around Category 1 to Category 2 status, but I have been seeing a trend a little bit more where it's leaning towards strength, more towards a Category 2 to potentially a Category 3 in our hands right up along the Texas coast. And the reason why is because we have seen a shift with the exact track of this storm system, where it wants to move a little bit further northward towards Texas rather than the southern Texas coast. So that would put areas such as Houston more at risk for direct impacts if we were to see a track a little bit further northward. And the reason why a more northward track would be the stronger case scenario is that, for one thing, it would have more time over water to intensify in a scenario like that compared to a southern track where it would hit land a decent amount earlier than the northern track would. So that does limit the possibility it'll strengthen more. And not only that, with a northern track, that means that this storm system would move at the same direction as the wind shear, which would mean that this storm would have a much better possibility of intensifying in a track that moves a little bit further northward up the Texas coast. And with a northern track as well, that would mean that the upper level winds would have more of an effect with this storm system. So the strength would also determine the track of this storm system. If the storm is a little stronger, we're more likely to see a track that's a little bit closer to Houston that moves a little bit further northward, since a stronger storm is typically associated with higher cloud tops, and that means a strong southerly upper level winds would push this storm system more to the north. But if we were to see a weaker storm system, the upper level winds would have less of an influence with the storm's trajectory, and it would more likely be influenced by the lower level winds, which would want to move the storm system a little bit further westward, a little bit earlier for a more southern track to occur, and it would be a weaker storm in that scenario. So we're definitely going to need to pay very close attention to the strength of this storm system, because it could also determine the track of this. So if this ends up strengthening a bit more than expected, you should expect a northern track and more direct impacts in Houston. But if this ends up staying weaker than anticipated, then we could expect a more southern track in Texas. So that will be very key, as I'll certainly keep you guys updated over the next several days. But what I could say is that most likely Texas will experience direct impacts from a hurricane. Exactly where, it's really all going to be determined by the strength of this storm system initially. And I'll certainly keep you guys updated once we get a little bit more confidence of what's going to happen and how the storm system evolves over the next several hours. In terms of the strength that the European model wants to take this storm system, it's taking quite a strong 966 millibar hurricane right up along the Texas coast, as this could be almost considered a Category 3, which does have me concerned. We could see potentially a major hurricane in our hands making landfall along the Texas coast, especially potentially close to the Houston area. So you definitely need to pay very close attention to that possibility. The GFS model is taking somewhat of a weaker scenario, where it's mainly taking out, say, a Category 1 landfall, and the landfall is also further southward than what the European model is stating, which makes sense because the GFS model scenario is a bit weaker, so the upper level winds won't have as much influence to steer the storm further northward. So right now the range seems to be anywhere between a Category 1 and Category 3, but the computer models have been leaning a little bit more towards category 2 strength and potentially as high as category 3. I'll certainly keep you guys updated over the next few days regarding what happens. Taking a look at the main mechanism in the lower levels that's expected to steer this storm, it's going to be this ridge that's located right over the southeast, and this trough as well will play a big role in terms of the track. So definitely pay very close attention to that over the next few days. So here's the European model ensemble members forecast, as we clearly see that the stronger scenarios move further northward closer to Houston. As right now, I'm leaning towards the landfall being somewhere in between Corpus Christi and Houston. So if you're anywhere between those areas or in those exact cities like Houston and Corpus Christi, you need to pay very close attention to this, especially along the coast where storm surge could potentially be catastrophic at times, as well as very gusty winds and heavy rain. Typically what you see in a hurricane that makes landfall in Texas. But remember that all storms are different, so you want to prepare as if this is going to be a very powerful hurricane, because it's just better to be safe than sorry. And you never know, because each hurricane, especially regarding what impacts you see in your localized area, is very different. But we see that the landfall could range anywhere from as far east as Houston to as far south as the Texas-Mexican border, but I'm leaning a little bit more towards Corpus Christi and Houston at this time, receiving category 1 or category 2 hurricane, potentially category 3 if everything goes right with this storm system. And we clearly see with the GFS models scenario, it's definitely taking a much weaker approach, which mainly a category 1 hurricane making landfall. And the ensemble members seem to focus in a little bit more further southward than the European model. So in the areas further southward, you don't want to rule out that possibility of a landfall just yet. So definitely keep both computer models in mind over the next several days. However, regardless of where it makes landfall, the one thing I could guarantee with this storm system as it makes landfall is an extreme flooding threat, where most areas right around eastern Texas could expect anywhere between 4 to 8 inches of rain, as we do see pretty large areas where it's a bit more than that, around 6 to 8 inches, and I'd only imagine closer to the landfall point, it could be maybe closer to 10 inches in localized areas. So you definitely want to be prepared for the possibility of major flooding associated with this tropical cyclone, especially since southeastern Texas has received quite a bit of rain over the past few months. So adding more rain on top of it, it's definitely very concerning and could lead to major flooding in many areas. So all throughout the Texas coast, including the areas even further northward into northeastern Texas and even into Louisiana in cities like Shreveport, you definitely need to be aware of the possibility of heavy rainfall. Houston, Corpus Christi could experience anywhere between 4 to 8 inches of rainfall, and maybe even as far west as Waco and San Antonio could get involved with some heavier rainfall with Hurricane Beryl as well. And of course, with a hurricane potentially this strong, you need to be aware of the possibility of heavy storm surge right up along the coast, where Corpus Christi Bay could experience anywhere between 3 to 5 feet of storm surge. So if you're not unaware of what storm surge is, just imagine an area right up along the coast or right up along the ocean, over normally dry ground. Add 3 to 5 feet of storm surge on top of that, and that's how much storm surge flooding you should expect over normally dry ground right up along the coast of Corpus Christi Bay and pretty much all throughout the Texas coast. So you definitely need to be aware of that possibility. Remember, it only takes 2 feet of water to move a car, so 3 to 5 feet of storm surge flooding is definitely very concerning. So definitely prepare as if you live in vulnerable areas right up along the coast. So anyways, guys, that's it for now. I thank you guys for watching. I'll make sure to keep you guys updated regarding Hurricane Beryl as it approaches the Texas coast, and make sure to stay safe all throughout the southeast coast. And I hope you guys all have a great day.